Let's do another study from the social approach. This is actually one of the older studies of the syllabus. It was there from the 2018 to 2023 syllabus as well as before that. So this is a study that's been there for a while. And these are one of those studies that you can actually get a few questions of from the past papers. It's a very interesting study, and many people know about the study as well. But for those of you who are taking AS psychology for the first time, this is one of those studies that most teachers usually start off with because it's a good way to introduce you to different psychological research and studies and what to expect in experiments, what to expect in a study as a whole. So imagine yourself in a setting where you see someone fall down and there are many other people around you as well. Now, you have the option to go and help this person up. So my question to you would be, would you immediately go and help that person up? Let's say you don't know them. You're walking on the street and you see someone who's fallen down. Would you immediately go and help them up? Or would you wait for other people to go and help them? Now, most people would answer by saying, yes, I would go and I would help them. I would help them immediately. And this is because people want to think of themselves as helpful, as good Samaritans, and they would like to think that if someone needed help, they would be there ready to provide any assistance to them. However, the reality of the situation is slightly different. There is a very high chance that you may not help them. And this has got nothing to do with you being a good or bad person, but instead it's got to do with the number of people who are around you. So the number of bystanders who are also present there during this emergency situation where this victim needs help. You may be thinking right now that I would help, but when you're actually in that situation, you might be thinking, you know what, maybe someone else will help. So I'll wait for someone else to go and take action. And for all you know, everyone else is probably thinking the same thing. And as a result, because everyone is thinking that someone else will take action, no one is really doing anything. So the victim who's on the floor may not actually receive immediate help. It might just be a while before someone actually goes and decides to help him. So this is the concept that we want to test in this study. So let's look at the background. There was a young woman, her name was Catherine Genovese, short Kitty Genovese. She was coming back home from work once really late at night, and she was attacked by this man near her apartment compound. Now, naturally, if she's getting attacked, she's going to be screaming and making a lot of noise. There were people who, in the apartment compound, looked out of their windows and they saw this incident happening in front of their eyes. But no one took any action. And when I say taking action, I don't mean that they have to go down and they have to physically stop this from happening. They could simply call the police. But no one did that either until it had been 45 minutes. And by then, when the police arrived, it was too late. She was already dead. So when the police was interviewing these witnesses, they were asked why it took so long for them to take any action. Some people said that they didn't want to get involved. One person said, I was too tired. But majority of the people who witnessed this incident said, we thought someone else might have already called the police. So this goes back to the same concept where although you would want to help, you are probably not helping because you have passed your responsibility of helping on to someone else. This idea of passing or diffusing your responsibility onto others is called the diffusion of responsibility hypothesis. Now, a hypothesis is basically something which is not a fact, it's a prediction It's something that we can predict may or may not happen. So there is no guarantee that this would always occur during an emergency situation. But based on this hypothesis, if there are many people present in an emergency situation, it is likely that each individual will pass their responsibility of helping on to one another. And as a result, immediate help may not be provided. However, if it was to be the other way around, and there were very few people present, then you cannot pass a responsibility on to a lot of people. And perhaps in that situation, you might take on the responsibility of helping upon yourself a lot quicker, and you might just end up providing immediate help. So based on this logic, we can assume that if there were fewer witnesses observing this Kitty Genovese incident, she might have actually been saved. If there were few people observing her getting killed, getting stabbed, perhaps one of them might have taken quicker action, taken all the responsibility upon themselves to call the police, and the police may have come a lot sooner and she may have survived. So this concept of diffusion of responsibility was tested by these two researchers, Darley and Latane, in a lab setting. It's called the smoke in the room experiment. And in this experiment, they had a participant in a lab in a room, and I believe there's a video of this on YouTube also, you can check it out. The participant was simply sitting in the room, and I believe they were filling a questionnaire, and they were alone in the room, and they were being observed through a video camera. Now, the room starts to fill up with smoke, and obviously the participant who's in that room will think that there's probably a fire, so they will think it's an emergency situation. Now, the idea here is that they are the only person in that room. So it is not possible for them to pass their responsibility of helping onto anyone else. So if you see the video footage of this study, you will see that the person actually immediately gets up and goes out of the room trying to look for help, basically to inform someone that, there might be a fire. This same procedure was repeated with 3 people. 2 were Confederates or stooges, so they were researchers pretending to be a participant, and 1 actual participant. And the same thing, the room starts to fill up with smoke. The 2 Confederates notice the smoke, but they continue doing the work that they were supposed to do, the questionnaire, whatever it is that they have to fill out. The actual participant is also obviously noticing the smoke, but is realizing that these other 2 people are not taking action, so they also remain seated. So essentially what they have done is they've passed their responsibility of helping or of taking action onto the other people. And these guys, the 3 of them, are in the room a lot longer, and smoke starts to fill up the entire room a lot longer than the first example. So this study clearly shows that there is a concept of diffusion of responsibility, that when there are more people present in an emergency situation, people pass the responsibility of helping on to others, and they do not provide immediate help. Conversely, if there are fewer people present, then people take the responsibility of helping upon themselves, and they provide a lot faster and more immediate help. So this concept of diffusion of responsibility is essentially the psychology being investigated in the study. And I've given different terms over here because different terms can be used by your examiners. They can refer to it as bystander behavior, bystander helping, or even bystander apathy. So all of these terms can be used interchangeably. So there are 2 aims of the study. The main aim is to test the diffusion of responsibility hypothesis in the natural setting of the New York subway. Now, Darley and Latane proved the diffusion of responsibility in the lab. But the problem with the lab experiment, as we all know, is that there is no ecological validity. We cannot generalize the findings to everyday life situations. That is why Piliavin has decided to also conduct a study to test the diffusion of responsibility hypothesis, but he wants to do it in a natural environment. So Piliavin is going for ecological validity. And the natural environment that has been chosen is that of the New York subway. Now, if a question were to come for 2 marks about the aim of the study, you can write either of the 2 aims that I mentioned here. I would go with the first one. But if you simply write Piliavin wanted to test the diffusion of responsibility hypothesis, you would probably get a 1 on 2. It's important to mention the entire statement that Piliavin wants to test the diffusion of responsibility hypothesis in the natural setting, and then just mention the natural setting of the New York subway. It's just another 3, 4, 5 words. There's no harm in adding these extra words. So just be safe and mention the setting as well. A more specific aim is to test whether helping behavior is affected by the condition of the victim, the race of the victim, and the modeling conditions. There's actually another one, which is the number of bystanders, which I have not added over here. But when we discuss the independent variables, you will see it over there. So what the second aim is saying that there are 4 independent variables and there is 1 dependent variable. So we want to see if helping behavior is affected by these 4 IVs, which is the race of a victim, the condition of a victim, modeling conditions, and number of bystanders. And we'll obviously discuss the details of each as we get into the procedure. So the method and design of the study is that it's a field experiment, and this was, I think this is the only field experiment in the syllabus. I don't think any of the new studies are field experiments, but this, for the longest time, was the only field experiment in your syllabus. And it is conducted at the New York subway, specifically from 59th Street to 125th Street, Harlem and Bronx Station. Do you need to know these? Yes, because Cambridge has this habit of asking very specific 1 to 2 mark questions about studies, which has got nothing to do with anything. So unfortunately, you would be required to remember specific details of studies, this being one of them. Along with being a field experiment, it's also an observation where there are 2 covert female observers who will be part of the subway train. So you can even consider them as being participant observers. Covert means that the participants are unaware that they're being observed. Let's discuss the independent variables. So there are 4. The first is the condition of the victim. So the victim is essentially the person who's going to be falling down. So the setup of the study is such that there will be an experimenter who will pretend to be a victim. And as we know, when a researcher pretends to be a participant or pretends to be part of the study, they are referred to as a stooge or a confederate. So one of the stooges will be a victim who will pretend to fall down in the subway, and we will see if the passengers on board the subway, who are the participants, will help this individual get up or not. Now, what are the conditions that we're setting for this victim? He will be either drunk or ill. The ill condition can also be called a cane condition. In the drunk condition, he will be holding a brown paper bag with an alcohol bottle in it, and he'll be smelling of alcohol himself. In the ill condition, he'll be holding a black colored cane or stick and pretending to be ill. Along with this, the victim will also be either black or white. So that's the second IV, the race of the victim. Then we have the third IV, which are the modeling conditions. Now, a model is someone who will show a certain behavior, and we see if participants repeat that behavior, if they copy that behavior, if they join in on that behavior or not. Over here, the behavior that the model will display is that of helping. The model is also a stooge. So the model is also an experimenter who will pretend to be a passenger on the train, who will go to help the victim after a certain time has elapsed, if none of the actual passengers have gone to help. So there are 4 conditions for the modeling conditions, which are critical early, critical late, adjacent early, and adjacent late, which we'll discuss as we get into the procedure. And the 4th IV is the number of bystanders. This is a pretty obvious one. We're expecting there to be less help if there are more bystanders on the train, but if there are fewer people, then we're expecting there to be a lot faster and more help, according again to the diffusion of responsibility hypothesis. DV is helping behavior operationalized or measured by recording the time taken to help as well as the number of people who help. And this will obviously be recorded by the 2 female observers who are on the passenger train as well. And so they are also technically confederates or stooges in the study. It's an independent measures design. So that means we have different participants exposed to the drunk victim, different participants exposed to the ill victim. And each participant is allocated to different conditions of the IV. Now, a question which people usually raise over here is, if they're always using the same route from 59th to 125th Street, which is Harlem Station to Bronx Station, isn't there a chance that some participants, some passengers may be repeated, considering that they'll be doing this study multiple times? So yes, there is a chance that some participants may be repeated. They may see this victim fall down more than once. However, that does not make it a repeated measure design. If participants are repeated, that's an uncontrollable variable. That's just an extraneous or a confounding variable that will lower the validity of the study. And it's something we have to deal with. And as we know about field experiments, one of the weaknesses is that there are fewer controls over confounding variables compared to a lab experiment. So this could potentially be one of them. So just because they're being repeated, it doesn't make it a repeated measures design. Our experimental design is an independent measures design. It would only be repeated if, as an experimenter, we intentionally repeat the participants in the study, not by chance. So this is a very large sample, perhaps the largest in the syllabus, 4,453 passengers. If you cannot remember this exact number, you can remember 4450. And there are people who boarded the subway. There are people traveling the New York subway. 55% of them are white, 45% black, both genders, male, females, different people of different ages, different backgrounds. All of these points are important for the generalizability of the study. Now, the subway train is actually going to be split into two compartments, two areas, which we call the critical area and the adjacent area. And I have a slide of the layout, which I will show you. But the critical area is essentially the area where the victim will fall down. So the victim is always going to fall down in one particular area. It's always the same area. And we call that area the critical area because that is where the emergency is happening. And the area right next to the critical area is going to be called the adjacent area. So on average, we have 43 people in this compartment per trial where this procedure will be conducted. And from these 43 people, on average, 8 to 10 people will be seated in the critical area where the victim will collapse. And it is an opportunity sampling technique, as obviously they are not even aware that they're part of a study. They just happen to be readily available at the subway when the procedure is being conducted. Okay, this is one study where we actually need to know the features and details of the experimenters because they are playing a very important role in the procedure. There are 16 experimenters in total, and they will be split into 4 teams. Now, the procedure is actually going to be conducted 103 times, and it will be done 103 trials will be conducted over a period of 2 months with around 6 to 8 trials per day. So naturally, it is not possible for a set of 4 experimenters to do the study 6 to 8 times for 2 entire months, 103 trials in total, which is why we've selected 16 experimenters, and they will be split into 4 teams who will take turns conducting the procedure. Now, Piliavin is not the actual stooge, victim, or model himself. He's actually hired these 16 experimenters from Columbia University. They're general study students who will take part in his study, and they will basically be the experimenters or the stooges who will be conducting the experiment. So from these 16 experimenters, there will be a total of 4 victims, 4 models, and 8 observers. And because they're being split into teams of 4, there will be 1 victim in each team, 1 model in each team, and 2 observers in each team. So each team has 4 experimenters, 1 model, 1 victim, 2 observers. And there are 4 such teams, 4 such teams, which equals 16 experimenters in total. Now, okay, so I told you that there are 4 teams. Teams 1 and 2 will begin the procedure on day 1, and they will start with the cane condition. And teams 3 and 4 will begin with the drunk condition, and they will alternate each day. You will conduct 1 condition per day. So on one particular day, you will only run the cane condition, and on the next day, you will only run the drunk condition. and then they will alternate. On day 4, Team 2 did not do as instructed. Team 2 was required to play the drunk victim, but the victim who was supposed to play a drunk man decided to switch and play an ill person instead because they felt uncomfortable playing a drunk person. And this could perhaps explain why, from 103 trials in total, 65 trials involve a drunk victim. Sorry, 65 trials involve an ill or cane victim, and only 38 trials involve a drunk victim. So you have more drunk trials than ill trials for this reason. Now let's talk a little bit about the victim. What are his features? What are his details? You should know the role. You should know the features because questions can be asked about the victim. They can be asked about all the experimenters, in fact. So there are 4 in total, as we know, 1 per trial. All the victims are male and they're aged 25 to 36 years. 3 of them are white and 1 of them is black. Now, why aren't there 2 white victims and 2 black victims? The reason for this, I believe, is because the general studies students, the class from where these experimenters were selected by Piliavin, there happened to be just 1 black person. Keep in mind the study was conducted in the 1960s in the US. So this 1 black victim is actually going to be the person to play the drunk black victim and the ill black victim. Whereas the other 3 white victims will obviously take turns playing either the drunk victim or the ill victim. Now, why is it important to know that they're all male and their age is 25 to 36? These are actually controls. Gender is not an independent variable. We are not seeing if helping behavior is affected by the gender of the victim. Because people may help a female victim more than a male victim. But if that is something that Piliavin wanted to see, he would have kept that as an IV, but he didn't. So just to make sure that gender doesn't act as a confounding variable, we will ensure that the victim is always male. Similarly, age is not an independent variable either. Ask yourself, who are you more likely to help? A young person or a 70-year-old individual? Obviously, your answer would be someone who's 70 to 80 years of age. So again, because age is not an IV, we have controlled the age of the victim to make sure that he is always young, within 25 to 36 years. Same logic can be applied to the dressing. We don't want people to help the victim because he is very nicely or formally dressed. So instead, we are making sure that all the victims are dressed identically in each trial in an Eisenhower jacket and trousers. This is a very casual style of dressing. Now, what is the role of the victim? As the participants board the train and the doors shut and the train begins to move from Harlem Station to Bronx, it's a 7.5-minute journey. 70 seconds into the journey, the victim who is sitting in the critical area will get up from his seat and he will stagger forward towards a pole and then he will collapse. As he collapses, he will stay on his back, staring at the ceiling and remain there until help is received. And he will be either drunk or ill. If he's drunk, he'll be holding a brown paper bag with a liquor bottle smelling of alcohol himself. If he is ill, he'll be holding a black colored cane and pretending to be ill. And he'll be either black or white. So that is essentially the role of the victim. Now, as the victim falls down, there will be a researcher who is the model, 1 per trial, 4 in total. And just like the victim, the model's features are also controlled. All the models are male and they're also young, age 24 to 29 years, also identically dressed in casual clothing. Now, the model's job is to actually go and help the victim after a certain time or number of seconds have passed, if none of the actual passengers have gone to help. Now, how much time does the model have to wait? So these are the 4 modeling conditions which we saw earlier on. The model has been instructed to wait either 70 seconds or 150 seconds. If after 70 seconds, we refer to that as an early condition. However, if the model is instructed by Piliavin to go and help after 150 seconds, we'll refer to that as the late condition. So what does critical early or adjacent late mean? So the first part of this term actually refers to where the model will be placed in the subway. So the model is going to help stand. Let's talk about the last experimenters now, observers. So we have one victim, one model, and because it's a team of 4, we have 2 more experimenters who will be 2 observers. Both the observers are females, and both the observers are actually seated in the see. Along with that, observers are also going to record the race and sex and location of anyone who helps the victim. So observer 1 will record how many black and white people, how many males and how many females helped the victim from the critical area. And observer 2 will record how many males and females, how many blacks and whites helped the victim, but from the adjacent area. So those who actually walk across from the adjacent area to go and help in the critical area. Observer 2 will also record the time it takes for the first person to help after the model is needed, as well as before the model is needed. So all of this is quantitative data. Along with this, both observers will also record any comments made by passengers, particularly those sitting next to them. So this will allow you to collect qualitative data. So you can also. Now, when we combine the roles of the experimenters, we essentially get the entire procedure. So to sum up, what will happen is team 1 comes and boards the train. They've taken permission from the New York subway, so they're always the first persons to enter the subway and take their positions. 2 observers will sit in their designated areas in the adjacent area. The victim will take his seat in the critical area, and the model will be either in the adjacent or critical area, depending on whichever condition he'll be running. Then, on average, 43 passengers board the train, 8 to 10 of whom will be on average in the critical area, the remaining in the adjacent area. The doors will shut. The train is now moving from 59th Street to 125th Street, which is a 7.5-minute journey. 70 seconds into the journey, the victim will get up, collapse, and will be either drunk or ill and black or white. The model will then intervene after either 70 or 150 seconds, if no one else helps, from either the critical or adjacent area. If the passengers, however many passengers go to help, how much time it takes for them to help, the number of blacks and whites, males and females who go and help, all of that will be recorded by the 2 observers who are seated in the adjacent area. They will also record comments for qualitative data. As the subway reaches the other station on 125th Street, the doors will open, the participants will leave, and they will not be debriefed. So that's another ethical issue. They are not going to be debriefed. Team 1 gets off, Team 2 gets on, a new set of 43 passengers get on, and they repeat the trial. And 1 condition is done per day in terms of cane or drunk. Then the next day they will alternate. And they do this 6 to 8 times a day, for around 2 months, 2.5 months, which gives us a total of 103 trials. And this is done from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. And from these 103 trials, 65 trials will be the ill condition, and 38 trials will be the drunk condition. At the layout. So this is a brief layout of what the subway would look like. So this is the critical area over here. And as you can see, this is where the victim will collapse. And this is the adjacent area. Now, if we are running on a particular trial, the critical early condition, then that means the model will be standing in the critical area and he will wait 70 seconds after the victim collapses to go and help if none of the other passengers helps. So if a question were to come asking you to describe the critical early condition for 2 marks, you have to mention 2 things. You have to mention where the model is standing, and you have to mention how much time he waits before helping. If we are discussing the critical late condition, you would say the model is standing in the critical area, that's 1 mark, and he would wait 150 seconds to help the victim if no one else helps. Adjacent early. If the adjacent early condition is being run, and the question is asking you to describe the adjacent early condition, you would say the model is standing in the adjacent area and is waiting 70 seconds to go and help the victim if no one else helps. And the adjacent late condition would be that the model is standing in the adjacent area and will wait 150 seconds to go and help if none of the other passengers helps. So in the adjacent area, adjacent conditions, that basically means he's somewhere here and he's actually walking all the way across to the critical area to help him, either after 70 or 150 seconds, depending on whether it is late or early. But if it is the critical conditions, then he's already present somewhere in this area. Now, what if the passengers actually do help within the 70 or 150-second time? If that is the case, then the model will not intervene. He will not go and help. He will stay put. Now, for the purpose of measuring diffusion of responsibility, if the passengers help within this time, within the 70 or 150-second duration, we will say that there has been immediate or spontaneous helping, or in other words, there hasn't been diffusion of responsibility. However, if the passengers do not help within the 70 or 150-second duration, and the model is required to go and help, then we refer to that as diffusion of responsibility. Then we simply count the number of people who then join in and help the model get the victim up once the model intervenes. So what we're expecting is that if the model is required and he is the first person to go and help, then we're expecting other passengers to also join in and help. But these passengers who join in and help after they see the model helping, they will be participants who would have shown diffusion of responsibility. But if any passengers help before the model is needed, then we will say that there hasn't been diffusion of responsibility. Keep in mind, participants are unaware that this is a study. They do not know that the model is actually a model. They just, if he does help, they'll think he's a regular passenger on the train. They do not know that the victim is pretending to be ill or drunk. They think he's a passenger who's actually ill or drunk and has fallen down. So they are completely unaware. So there's a lot of deception happening in this study. So victim will be in the critical area, model will be either in the adjacent or critical area, depending on whichever condition he's running. Observers, as you can see, it's labeled here. Observer 1 is over here in the adjacent area, and observer 2 is also over here in the adjacent area. 1 is actually closer to the critical area. Keep in mind, a lot of students make this mistake. They say one observer is in the critical area. No, both are in the adjacent area. One is just closer. Now, what are they observing? Observer 1 is recording the race, the sex, and the location of everyone seated in the critical area. So how many black and white people are seated over here? How many males and females are seated over here? And observer 2 is recording the same thing, but for passengers in the adjacent area. Along with that, let me go. Okay, let's look at the results of the study. Now, keep in mind, if participants help immediately before the model is needed, we say that there hasn't been diffusion of responsibility. So for 65, from the 65 ill or cane trials, 62 trials, the participants helped immediately. The passengers helped before the model was needed. So there were only 3 trials in which the model was actually required to go and intervene and help the victim get up because none of the passengers helped within the 150 or 70-second duration. So this is basically telling you, surprisingly, that there wasn't diffusion of responsibility, which goes completely against what we were expecting. However, let's see what it was for the for the drunk conditions. For the drunk trials, out of 38 trials, 19 trials, there was diffusion of responsibility, but 19 trials, people helped before the model was needed. So over here, there's a 50-50 split. 50% of the time, there was diffusion of responsibility, 50% there wasn't. This is for the drunk trial. Whereas for the ill trial, almost 100%, there was absolutely no diffusion of responsibility. Now, the median latency, or the average time in simpler words, that it took for the passengers to help the ill victim was 5 seconds. And the average time it took for the drunk victim to be helped by the passengers was 109 seconds. So we clearly are seeing that there hasn't really been a lot of diffusion of responsibility. If you combine the results, that's a total of 62 ill and 19 drunk. 81 trials out of 103 in total where we did not see diffusion of responsibility. That's almost 80%. 90% of the helpers overall were male. 55% helpers were white and 45% were black. When the model helped, others were likely to join in. When the victim was white, 65% helpers were white, but when the victim was black, 50% helpers were black and 50% helpers were white. Now, there are two specific results that I want to tell you just about the critical area. The 8 to 10 people who were in the critical area, or if anyone else came and joined, what were, actually, no, not. This is only for the 8 to 10 people in the critical area. Two specific results for them. A question has come on the results of the critical area only 2 times in the past papers since 2018, since the syllabus changed. One was, I think, in 2018 only, and one just now in the October-November 2023 session. So one result of the critical area is that 60% helpers were male. So overall, in the entire subway, 90% helpers were male, but specifically for the critical area, only 60% helpers were male. And the other specific result of just the critical area is that in 21 trials, or approximately 20% trials, a total of 34 people actually got up and walked away from the emergency situation. So they didn't want to get involved. They felt so uncomfortable that they got up and they actually walked away into the adjacent area. So there were 34 in total in around about 21 trials. So all of this is quantitative data. Along with this, there is also qualitative data. There were comments made mostly by female participants, such as, I am not strong enough to help, or it is for men to help. This can actually explain why there were 90% helpers male overall, because females actually believe it is a job for a man to help, or that they are physically not strong enough to help the victim get up. Now, here is a very interesting result. At the beginning of the study, Piliavin actually hypothesized or predicted that there would be more help in smaller groups and less help in larger groups. So if we were to take hypothetical groups of 3 and hypothetical groups of 7, we're actually going to predict that, or what we can predict is that in groups of 3, people will actually help a lot faster as opposed to people who are sitting in groups of 7. Because in groups of 3, we're expecting fewer diffusion of responsibility. But the actual results showed us that there was faster and more helping in larger groups as opposed to smaller groups. So the entire diffusion of responsibility concept or hypothesis was completely rejected in this study. And that brings us to the conclusions. So like I said, results rejected the diffusion of responsibility hypothesis. Men are more likely to help than women in emergency situations. An ill person is more likely to receive help than the drunk person. So obviously there are other reasons that could explain these findings. For example, you could say that they're in a closed space. So you can't really escape the setting. You are directly involved whether you like it or not. So at the end of the day, you're not just going to keep sitting and just wait for that guy to just die. You're just going to eventually go up and help him because you will feel awkward. You will feel uncomfortable. Maybe if this was an open space, like an open area, perhaps you would have actually seen diffusion of responsibility. But for this particular study, the hypothesis was rejected. Now, Piliavin has actually come up with an alternate explanation to try and explain the behavior of the passengers that we saw. And this explanation is called the cost-reward matrix, also known as the cost-benefit model. According to this model, there are 4 conditions that would explain the behavior of the participants. And these 4 are the reward of helping, or the reward of not helping, the cost of helping, and the cost of not helping. Now, imagine yourself in this setting. You see the victim fall down. Before you take any action, you will think of one of these situations. What would be the cost to you of helping? If you were to go and help the victim, let's say the drunk victim, you might think that, okay, this guy might harm me. I might get hurt. So that would be the cost of helping to you. The cost of not helping would be feeling guilty. The feeling of guilt might make you feel upset, might cause a little bit of psychological harm to you for the whole day. The reward of helping, however, would be people would praise you. You would feel good. You would feel like you've done a good job. You would feel like a good Samaritan. And the reward of not helping would be that, let's say if it's the drunk victim, you won't get harmed because you're thinking he might harm you. So if you don't help him, you're not getting involved, he might not harm you. So based on these four situations, participants decided to take action or not. And the reason they had to take action is because they were going through a very unpleasant arousal. They were not comfortable when they saw this incident happen. So they had to either go and help and take action or not take action and perhaps even walk away, like the 34 people who did walk away from the critical area. So issues and debates of the study are, in terms of the nature-nurture debate, I would say it favors the nurture side more. Some people may have, or generally, so, one reason why people may help an ill person more than the drunk person is because you may learn from your environment that drunk people are more dangerous. They are unpredictable. They might harm you. They might act very rash, whereas an ill person is less likely to do that. So based on this learning, this information that you've learned about an ill and a drunk person, your helping behavior can definitely be affected. In terms of the individual situational explanation, overall, I would say it's favoring the situational side because you're in a situation where there is a drunk person or an ill person. And in the drunk condition, there was less help provided immediately. But in the situation of an ill person, there was a lot more help. 62 out of 65 trials as opposed to 19 out of 38. You can actually support the situational side by backing it up with these numbers. Because a 6-mark question or an 8-mark question could come about the debate in which you would have to talk about which side is being favored and you would have to support it with the result. So these are the results that you could use. Now, a result that would support the individual side would be the females who made comments such as, I am not strong enough to help. So they are not helping because of the situation. They are helping because they are admitting that individually they have a characteristic, a personality trait that is not allowing them to help, that they are not strong enough to help. So perhaps the reason there are more male helpers is because of individual differences where females are perhaps not physically able to help the victim. So these results could favor the individual explanation. And in terms of the application, it's pretty straightforward. If we are aware of the concept of diffusion of responsibility and we're in an emergency situation, we should not wait to pass our responsibility of helping on to others, as was seen in the Kitty Genovese incident, but instead, we should go and help immediately because that would encourage other people to also join in. Furthermore, if there is a drunk person who has fallen down, based on these results, we know that it is unlikely that they would be provided help immediately. So if we, again, are the first ones to go and help the person get up, then others also might come in and join in the helping behavior. Evaluation now. Reliability, although reliability could go both ways. So although this is a field experiment, it can also be considered a controlled observation. And the evidence of that is that in past papers, this study has actually been referred to as a controlled observation in paper 2. So the reason it's a controlled observation is that they have managed to control a lot of variables. For example, the way the victim will fall down. For example, the time after which he falls down, the manner in which he falls down, the dressing of all the stooges, where they're seated, all of that is controlled. So because it's such a standardized procedure, it can be replicated. In fact, it was replicated 103 times in order for it to be tested for reliability. So it's highly standardized and it can be replicated for reliability. But one way that reliability may not be there is, again, some participants may be repeated. There is no inter-observer reliability because even though there are 2 observers, they are not observing the same participants. Observer 1 is observing the participants in the critical area. Observer 2 is observing the passengers in the adjacent area. so they cannot cross-check their observations. So there is no inter-observer reliability. Another very small point, and I wouldn't use this as a main weakness for reliability, but I would keep this in mind if a trick question were to come in paper 2, which was, what is one way, or which were to be, if what is one way the study by Piliavin lacks reliability? And the answer to this would be that the number of trials is not fixed. There are 6 to 8 trials per day. So again, not a very strong point, but yes, definitely a point that you can consider. And the reason I say that is because there was a study by Yamamoto that has now been removed from the syllabus. It was a lab experiment. A question once came on reliability, in which they asked, what is one way that the study lacks reliability? And a lot of students were unable to answer that because it was a highly controlled lab experiment, and students could not think of any way in which the study does not have reliability. And the answer for that was that the number of trials was not fixed. It was 2 to 4 trials. So the same logic can be applied to the Piliavin study. In terms of validity, again, it is a strength because participants are unaware of the part of the study. So no demand characteristics, natural behavior. Furthermore, all the confounding variables that I discussed earlier about the dressing, the age, the gender were controlled. So that increases validity as well. But if participants are repeated by chance and they do see the victim more than once fall down, then they may show demand characteristics. They may be suspicious of the behavior of the stooge, in which case validity may be reduced. Ecological validity is a strength. It's a natural setting of the New York subway, and the study also has mundane realism, as you can expect people to help someone who's fallen down in everyday life. So the task is something that is close to a real life situation. Generalizability can be both a strength and weakness. It's a very large sample. Even mix of white and black people includes both males and females. So it's representing a large population of people from New York, so it's generalizable to them. However, it is not generalizable to people outside New York. So maybe the results might be different for other cultures, people in other cities. So they are not being represented. So generalizability can be used as a strength and weakness for Piliavin. Ethics is definitely a weakness. The only ethical guideline that is actually being maintained is that of confidentiality, as none of the personal information of the participants is being revealed, but they're unaware that they're being studied, that they're being observed, so there is no consent. They're deceived into thinking that the victim is actually collapsed and is actually drunk or ill. It might have been uncomfortable for them. They might have felt guilty for not helping, so they were not protected from psychological harm. They cannot they cannot exit the train because it's a moving train, and they have no choice but to take part in the study, so they do not have the right to withdraw either. And lastly, they were not debriefed. So a lot of ethical issues. I think ethics is definitely a weakness. Data is a strength because there is both quantitative and qualitative data. Quantitative data is objective and numerical, so we can compare results. We can compare the results of the drunk trials to the ill trials, and the qualitative data helps us understand why there are more male helpers than female helpers. So data is definitely a strength. Opportunity sampling you can use as a strength and weakness. The strength is that people are readily available, so it's more convenient. People may not know that they're part of a study, so fewer chances of demand characteristics, which increases validity. But the weakness is that if they're unaware they're part of a study, then it can be unethical because there won't be any consent. So that is it for Piliavin. If you have any questions, please comment below, and I will be back with more studies. Bye bye.